The desert air was bone-dry and biting cold as Daniel Ward stirred awake, his body half buried under a thin layer of sand. His head throbbed violently, a cruel reminder of the heavy drinking from the night before. Blinking against the blinding sun, he sat up and turned in all directions, but all he could see was an endless ocean of dunes, rippling under the morning heat. Panic gnawed at his chest. He had no idea which way he'd come from or where he should go. The only certainty was that he had wandered deep into the desert, and now, utterly alone, he had to find a way out. Daniel pushed himself to his feet, his legs trembling under his own weight. Every step he took sank slightly into the soft sand, draining his strength faster than he expected. The sun climbed higher, burning mercilessly overhead, and beads of sweat began to slide down his forehead, stinging his eyes. His mouth felt like it was packed with cotton, his tongue heavy and useless, scraping against the roof of his mouth with every shallow breath. The heat distorted the horizon, making distant dunes waver and dance like ghostly mirages. With no landmarks to guide him, no sign of life in any direction, he chose a random path and started walking, praying that somehow, somewhere, he would find a way back to civilization before the desert swallowed him whole. Hours slipped by, though Daniel had no way of telling how many. The desert was endless, a shifting maze of sand and shimmering heat that played cruel tricks on his mind. His legs moved on instinct alone, mechanical and sluggish, while his mind drifted into a haze of exhaustion and thirst. Just as he was about to collapse, he caught sight of something green. Squinting through the blinding sunlight, he saw what looked like an oasis in the distance, palm trees swaying gently and a sparkling pool of water at their base. A jolt of hope surged through him, cutting through the fog of his senses. Clutching his aching sides, Daniel forced himself forward, his cracked lips whispering prayers under his breath, desperate for the salvation that seemed just within reach. But no matter how far Daniel walked, the oasis never seemed to grow any closer. It hovered on the horizon like a cruel joke, an illusion spun by the merciless sun. His legs moved slower with each agonizing step, the muscles cramping and locking beneath him. The dry wind stung his sunburnt skin, carrying whispers that sounded almost like laughter. His feet dragged through the sand, carving uneven lines behind him, and his vision blurred at the edges, colors bleeding together into a dizzying haze. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic, erratic drumbeat, as his mind struggled to hold on to hope. At some point, he lost his balance and crumpled to the ground, too weak to rise. The desert pulsed around him, an endless, searing landscape that seemed to breathe and twist under the molten sky. Darkness pressed in at the corners of his mind, thick and suffocating, and with one final desperate gasp, Daniel surrendered to it, slipping into unconsciousness as the false paradise shimmered mockingly before him. When Daniel awoke, the sun had shifted slightly, casting long, jagged shadows across the dunes. His head pounded with a relentless ache, and every muscle in his body screamed in protest as he forced himself upright. Blinking against the stabbing brightness, he gasped. There it was again, the oasis. But this time, it looked different. Closer, more vivid, more alive. The palm trees seemed greener, their fronds swaying with a breeze he couldn't feel, and the pool of water sparkled so brightly it was almost painful to look at. Daniel's heart lurched in his chest, torn between disbelief and desperate hope. Was this real? Or just another mirage sent to torment him? He didn't care. Staggering to his feet, he stumbled forward, driven by a singular primal need to drink, to survive, to reach that haven before it could vanish once more. Every step toward the oasis felt endless, as if the sand itself were conspiring to hold him back. His breath came in short, ragged gasps, and dark spots danced at the edges of his vision. Still, he pressed on, his mind locked on the glimmering prize ahead. When at last he crossed the final stretch of burning sand and stumbled into the shade of the palm trees, it felt like a dream. The air was cooler here, heavy with the sweet, earthy scent of greenery. Daniel fell to his knees beside the pool, scooping up the water with trembling hands. It was cold and clean, sliding down his parched throat like salvation itself. He drank until his stomach ached, then collapsed back onto the soft patch of grass, letting the shadows of the trees cloak him in their shelter. For the first time since he had woken in the desert, he allowed himself to believe he might survive. Daniel decided to stay within the oasis until the worst of the sun's fury had passed. He nestled himself against the trunk of a palm tree, feeling the rough texture against his back, and watched as the sky slowly shifted from a blinding blue to deep hues of orange and crimson. Strange shapes moved at the edges of the oasis, shadows that didn't seem to belong to any tree or stone. A creeping unease began to gnaw at him, but he pushed it aside, telling himself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on his mind. As the last rays of sunlight dipped behind the dunes, Daniel rose unsteadily to his feet, ready to continue his journey. He had no idea where he was going, but the thought of staying here another night with those restless shadows whispering through the trees was somehow more terrifying than the desert itself. As Daniel stepped away from the oasis, the world seemed to shift around him. The air grew colder, and the once vibrant oasis behind him began to fade into the distance, its lushness becoming a distant mirage again. His legs were stiff, his body still aching from the strain of walking, but there was a growing sense of urgency, an invisible pull that urged him forward. As he walked, the shadows lengthened and stretched unnaturally, twisting into grotesque forms. Then, just ahead, he saw it, a figure. At first, it seemed like a person standing still, barely moving. But as he looked closer, his heart skipped a beat. No matter which direction he looked, the figure was always in front of him, standing motionless in the sand, staring at him with an unsettling presence. His breath caught in his throat, and panic bubbled to the surface. He turned to run, but no matter how fast he moved, it seemed like the figure was always there, right in front of him, waiting. Daniel's heart pounded violently in his chest as he broke into a full sprint, the sensation of being hunted overwhelming every thought. The figure, its features still too blurry to make out, followed him in perfect sync, no matter which way he turned. The desert seemed to stretch on forever, the dunes rolling like waves beneath his feet, but the figure remained there, a silent, haunting presence that never wavered. His breath came in ragged gasps, his legs burning with fatigue, and fear clawed at his mind. It wasn't just the figure anymore, it was the weight of the desert itself, the oppressive silence pressing down on him from all sides. Finally, in a dazed blur of exhaustion, he saw something up ahead, a faint light, flickering like a distant city in the night. Without thinking, he staggered toward it, the hope of finding civilization pushing him forward. But before he could reach it, his body gave out, and he collapsed, darkness swallowing him once more. When Daniel opened his eyes again, the sun was rising, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. His body ached all over, but the weight of fear had lifted, replaced by a strange sense of stillness. A vehicle was parked a few feet away, an old, weathered car, driven by a man with a thick beard and dark eyes. He was an Arab, his face lined with the story of years spent under the harsh sun. The man reached out, offering him a hand, and Daniel took it, his body trembling with relief. "You are lucky," the man said, his voice deep and steady, though his eyes carried a hint of something unreadable. "Not many survive out here alone." Daniel nodded, too exhausted to speak, and as the man helped him into the car, he couldn't shake the feeling that the oasis, the figure, and the endless desert were not just a nightmare, but something darker, something that would follow him long after he left the dunes behind. The desert stretched out like a dead sea, black and endless under a hollow sky. Evan trudged forward, his boots sinking into the cold sand, each step harder than the last. His flashlight, dim and sputtering, barely touched the darkness, the beam shivering against the dunes. He had wandered away from his group hours ago, chasing what he thought was a distant glimmer. Now there was only silence, no wind, no sound, just the suffocating weight of the night. Every muscle in his body screamed to turn back, but he no longer knew which way that was. He paused, heart pounding, listening. For a moment there was nothing. Then, soft and deliberate, a faint crunch of sand behind him. He spun around, but the flashlight caught only swirling dust and empty space. Evan's breath quickened, misting faintly in the cold desert air. He gripped the flashlight tighter, feeling the sweat slick on his palms. His mind raced. Had it just been the sand shifting under his own weight? Or was someone something, really following him. He took a cautious step backward, scanning the dunes, but the darkness was thick and absolute. A feeling of being watched burrowed deep into his spine, making his skin crawl. He wanted to call out, to shout for his friends, but his throat locked up, strangling the words before they could escape. The desert seemed to lean closer, as if listening. Another step, another crunch. This time, unmistakable, deliberate, almost lazy. Evan turned and started walking faster, forcing himself not to run. Whatever it was, he couldn't let it know he was afraid. The dunes shifted around him like living things, rising and falling in the weak beam of his flashlight. Evan stumbled, cursing under his breath, sand pouring into his boots. Behind him, the footsteps grew louder, closer, though he still saw nothing. His pulse hammered in his ears, drowning out everything else. He dared a glance over his shoulder, and his heart nearly stopped. Far back, at the crest of a dune, stood a figure, barely more than a silhouette, featureless and still. Evan froze, breath caught in his chest. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It simply watched. Panic flooded through him, and he turned away, moving faster now, half running, half sliding down the dunes. The sand seemed to pull at his feet, trying to trip him, to slow him down. He didn't dare look back again. Evan's legs burned as he forced himself forward, the muscles in his thighs screaming with every step. The desert ahead seemed endless, a rolling nightmare of sand and shadow. He thought he could outrun it, whatever it was, but when he finally risked another glance over his shoulder, his blood turned to ice. The figure was closer, much closer, still silent, still motionless, but somehow having crossed a great distance in an impossibly short time. Evan stumbled again, nearly falling. He scrambled back to his feet, gasping. The light from his flashlight flickered wildly, casting broken shapes on the dunes. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw other figures too, half-formed in the darkness, standing just beyond the edge of the beam. He shook his head violently and pressed on. The flashlight gave a final sputter and died, plunging Evan into a darkness so complete it felt physical, smothering. He stood frozen, too terrified to move, listening to the desert breathe around him. His heart pounded so loudly he thought it might drown out the world. Then he heard it, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching through the sand, steadily approaching. No longer trying to stay hidden, no longer distant. His survival instincts finally snapped into action. Evan turned blindly in the dark and ran, the sand slipping and collapsing beneath him. He didn't know where he was going, didn't care. All that mattered was putting distance between himself and the thing he knew was following, patient and tireless in the endless night. Evan's lungs burned as he sprinted blindly through the night, the sand dragging at his legs like quicksand. He couldn't hear the footsteps anymore, but he didn't dare stop. The desert blurred into a swirling chaos of black dunes and broken stars overhead. He stumbled over a low ridge and tumbled down the other side, rolling to a stop at the bottom. For a moment, he just lay there gasping, feeling the sand stick to his sweaty skin. Then he heard it, breathing. Not his own. Deep, slow, steady, right above him. Evan's stomach twisted in terror. Slowly, against every instinct screaming at him to run, he lifted his head. At the top of the dune he had fallen from, a dark shape loomed, utterly still, waiting. A sound like dry cloth dragging over sand broke the silence, and Evan snapped to his feet in raw panic. He bolted again, veering into the deeper dunes, the terrain growing rougher and more uneven. His body cried out for rest, but fear drove him harder than any exhaustion. He thought he saw lights in the distance, small, pale glimmers. Maybe a camp, a road, anything. He didn't care if it was real or another trick of the desert. He fixed his eyes on the flickering glow and pushed himself toward it. Behind him, the soft, dragging noise continued, slow but unrelenting, never falling behind. Every time he glanced over his shoulder, the figure was there, somehow closer, its shape growing sharper in the dark. The lights grew brighter, resolving into a string of lanterns hanging along what looked like a dusty path winding between the dunes. Evan stumbled onto it, barely keeping his footing. He followed the path without thinking, desperate to believe it led somewhere safe. For a moment, it seemed like the figure had vanished, swallowed by the dark. His steps slowed, and hope clawed weakly at his chest. Maybe he had lost it. Maybe it had given up. But then he caught movement out of the corner of his eye, a flicker of blackness just beyond the edge of the lantern light. The figure was pacing him now, hidden in the dark, waiting for him to slow down, to fall. Evan's hope shattered, replaced by raw, animal terror. Lanterns blurred past as Evan ran harder, the rough path twisting and pitching beneath him. His vision tunneled, the desert spinning into a dizzying spiral of gold light and black shadow. A heavy pressure built behind him as if the figure were breathing down his neck, close enough to reach out and touch. His legs faltered, his strength draining away. Somewhere ahead, he saw the faint outline of a building. Small, battered by sand, but real. Shelter. Safety. With the last of his willpower, Evan lunged toward it, ignoring the burning in his chest and the screaming of every muscle. As he reached the cracked door, he dared one final look behind, and the figure was there, an arm's length away, its face still hidden, but its presence crushing and real. Evan staggered back from the advancing figure, his hands scraping along the cracked wall. The air grew heavy, filled with the metallic scent of approaching rain, and he realized with a jolt there was a sound outside. Distant at first, then growing louder, the unmistakable roar of an engine. He threw his weight against the door again, feeling it crack and splinter under the force. Sand poured in from the corners, and the figure moved closer. But now Evan had a direction, a reason to fight. With a final, desperate shove, the door burst open, and he tumbled out onto the cold sand, coughing and gasping for air as headlights pierced the darkness beyond the dunes. A battered jeep raced toward him, driven by a man shouting in a language Evan barely understood. Without thinking, Evan forced himself up, sprinting toward the vehicle with the last scraps of energy left in his broken body. He didn't dare look behind him. He could feel the figure's presence clawing at his back, furious and desperate. The driver hauled him into the jeep, slamming the door just as the figure reached the edge of the headlights. Frozen there like smoke caught in a beam of light, Evan collapsed into the seat, trembling as the jeep sped away across the dunes. Behind him, the desert stretched on, endless and merciless. But he was free.